Thank you all for coming today. Today, we've had many subjects previously about the development of Korean Buddhism, and this is another kind of historical chapter of one particular thread, one type of Korean Buddhism that's very important in the historical evolution. This is kind of an academic or scholastic sort of Buddhism. Let's say that in the whole realm of Buddhism, we find three basic types of practice of how Buddhism is done, and they are interrelated. There's the scholastic academic type of Buddhism. There is meditation-devoted Buddhism, which is mostly what we talk about here, Sunbulgyo, or in English, Zen Buddhism, meditational Buddhism. And there's also devotional Buddhism, the bowing and chanting scriptures in front of statues, doing 108 bows, bowing to paintings, to understand a belief in heavens and hells and gods and spirits, supernatural things. Devotional Buddhism, that's called. Now, those three, they're kind of distinct threads from each other. They're all related, certainly, and they interrelate. Almost nobody practices only one of those. Some of the common village people might be only on the devotional part of Buddhism, just praying to a statue, basically. And there are really hardcore Zen Sun monks who don't study anything written down, but just meditate intensively. And there are the scholastic kind of monks who only study but even they would meditate sometimes. Usually most Buddhist practitioners do all three to some extent, trying to understand the scriptures, understand the teachings, and also practice meditation, to put it into practice, train the mind, focus, and also do some chanting and some bowing and respecting of images altogether. But there are these three kinds. They used to be rather distinct in Korea, and those three kinds often used to argue and dispute with each other during Korean history. There were different temples, different schools, and they would fight and say that you guys who only meditate, you got it all wrong. You don't understand the real teachings of the sutras. And the Sun monks would say, oh, well, you guys are just reading books. You don't really meditate intensively, so you're not getting to enlightenment. Not really. It's all phony. And the devotional people would say, you have to pray for salvation to Amita Buddha and the Bodhisattva of compassion. That's the main thing. Get that in your heart. Devotional heart, and all these fancy theories don't matter. They would fight and dispute. Korean Buddhism is somewhat unique in the whole world in the way that it got unified 800 years ago, that these three types of Buddhism were brought together successfully into a harmonious, grand system, and this is the Jogye Buddhist order, and also to some extent the subsidiary Taego order here, the great majority of all Korean Buddhism that really is focused on all three things in a proper balance. Korean Buddhism as we know it today, and therefore that's why Korean Buddhism is the most holistic. Other countries are still often divided between these types of groups, different schools. But today's lecture is about one particular school of scholastic Buddhism, probably the most important one in Korean history, that goes together in this unification that eventually united with Sun Buddhism, the Zen Buddhism meditational, with some touches of devotional, and made it Korean Buddhism as we know it today. It's called Hwaom Buddhism. Now, what is that? We'll get into that first. The Hwaom Jong means a school or a sect, a type of Buddhism. There's the Sun Jong, Hwaom Jong, the Chunte Jong for the Tiantai Buddhism, and other Jong. Today, the Jogye Jong is the unified Korean Buddhism. The school, the Hwaom Jong, for a long time. Now, in original Sanskrit and known internationally to scholars and Buddhist lovers, Avatamsaka. It's called the Avatamsaka Buddhism. In Chinese, that's Huayan, which gets to Korean pronunciation, Hua Om. It's the same Chinese characters here, Huayan. In Japanese, it's the same characters. Japanese call it Kegon. Kegon Buddhism. This is just different pronunciation. It's the same thing. Okay, or in English, flower garland. And what this means, these characters, is this, a wreath of flowers. Flower is always in Buddhism the symbol of enlightenment. The lotus flower, the Yunhua, and next weekend is the great Yunhua Jukje, the lotus festival of Korean Buddhism. Buddha's birthday. The flower represents the enlightenment, the flowering of the human Buddha nature into realization. And here, a wreath of connected flowers, everything connected together. The flowers all have their stems intertwined, and different kinds of flowers. They're all connected to each other in a circle, which means there's no beginning and no end, an infinite circle and cycle of interconnection. That's what it means, a flower garland. And this sutra, this is a particular sutra of Buddhism. A sutra means, the collection of Buddha's lectures, what the Buddha actually said. Those are sutras. Those were written down after he died. Many of them not really written and collected until Emperor Ashoka's time, about 250 years after Buddha lived and taught. Such as those who remembered his lectures were writing them down, and it becomes a collection, a library collection. That's all say out. Okay, so those are what the Buddha actually said. Those are sutras. There are also sastras. Sastras, which are great essays by great masters who explain what the Buddha said. They'll take just one section, one paragraph of the Buddha's lecture and say, what did he mean by this? And they'll write 100 pages of commentary about it. Those are the sastras. And then there's the Vinaya, the rules of the monks and the community that they live by. Okay, so that's sutras, the actual records of the Buddha. The Avatamsaka Sutra then is said to be a lecture spoken by the Buddha. It's actually a compilation. It's a compilation of various scriptures of various lengths. It's not one work. It's 5 or 6 different Buddhist texts from India, all of them claiming to be something that the Buddha actually said, and they were put together. They have some common themes, but they're really fairly different from each other. So the Avatamsaka Sutra is very long. It's one of the longest of all Buddhist sutras. It takes a long time to read it or to study it and such, and it is in distinctly different parts that say different things. All right. The earliest part of it, the 10 Sages Sutra, which 10 stages of progress on the Bodhisattva path, and this is the earliest part of this, and it's a part that can be separated by itself. Some people just take that as a separate book and study it by itself. 1st century CE, we think that was written down and composed. Now, these later sutras, like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, were probably not actually spoken by Sakyamuni Buddha. It's probably not really his lecture, although Buddhists believe that it is, but these things are actually written hundreds of years after him and are much fancier, much more elaborate than the early scriptures, that what we really know that he said, what we think are pretty accurate. It's much more highly developed than that. So philosophically, this is something that was written before the year 0, about 100 years before 0, about 100 years after Emperor Ashoka organized Buddhism into a big religion. And at that point, Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism begin dividing, the north and the south. And the northern Buddhism comes to China, And the Southern Buddhism goes to Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, and they really become pretty different from each other. At this point, people are writing new scriptures, and this is one of them. That's the earliest part. Other parts of this Avatamsaka Sutra seem to be written after the year 0, up to 100 AD, 200 AD, in the Silk Road region, those great temples that line the Silk Road between India to China. Different parts of this were written and then written again and added to and recopied. And eventually, this all made it to China around the 400s. The 400s in the Silk Road, that gets put together into one collection of many scrolls from 5 or 6 different sources, bunched together, and it comes to China officially for translation. And this is, as always, a major problem in itself. These things are written in original Indian Sanskrit and then in Central Asian languages, of which there were several written types and such. And those type of languages are really, really different from Chinese in syntax, in grammar, in just the way sentences are organized, and in vocabulary. They just have really different words. And so to translate them into Chinese is just a major problem and major headache. The Chinese had to invent completely new vocabulary. They had to use vocabulary from Confucianism and Taoism, the previous Chinese philosophies. They had to borrow vocabulary to translate these Indian terms, and it doesn't exactly fit, not at all. Because in addition, in the problem here, the Indian way of thinking, the way of thinking of India and the Buddha, is just a very different way of thinking than Chinese thought. The way the Chinese think and deal with things, in some ways, kind of really very opposite. And so it was very difficult to translate. And maybe it still is today, and trying to get these things into English, of course, is a major problem. So just say this was a difficult process. And the Avatamsaka Sutra, as we know it, as a Chinese document translated into Chinese characters, is a different thing than these 5 or 6 original scriptures in Sanskrit from India. Really, the concepts change, is what I'm trying to say. Concepts and philosophical ideas, it gets somewhat different. This is how we get, really, Chinese Buddhism. It becomes something with Chinese cultural characteristics. And then it moves into Korea as Chinese Buddhism, and step by step, that becomes Korean Buddhism. This happens in every country, and in Japanese Buddhism, something a little bit different in itself. They always have national characteristics, and there's really no absolutely pure and original Buddhism. Indian Buddhism is Indian. It has Indian culture with it. All right, 400s. It's one of the longest sutras in the Buddhist canon, contains 40 chapters. 40 chapters, and each chapter is as big as like a small book. So this takes a long time to read, and a very long time to try to understand what it's about. It integrates and advances the Sunyata and Yogacara teachings. These are both earlier from India, or like Emperor Ashoka era schools of Buddhist philosophy, very scholastic, very academic, very, still today, difficult to understand. From this, the Sunyata philosophy especially, we get the idea of emptiness, which is in that Heart Sutra that we were just chanting now. The Heart Sutra is all about the ultimate emptiness of all dharmas. This kind of philosophy developed that. And this Avatamsaka Sutra, it kind of unites some of these earlier philosophical schools and upgrades them. It takes it to a new, higher philosophical and religious level as civilization itself was advancing, getting more sophisticated, and religion and philosophy getting to a higher step, let's say, over hundreds of years. So it represents that. And most of its later influence is not from the details, not exactly what it says. People don't usually refer exactly to the words of the Avatamsaka Sutra to prove their point. It comes from commentaries, which, as I said before, are sastra. The sastra commentaries of Buddhism, which means the kind of Dharma explanation that great masters made. Because again, the Indian way of thinking, very different from the Chinese. And so when finally they translated this into Chinese, and still Chinese Buddhist students are reading this and saying, I don't understand this. And so their teacher would explain what it means in Chinese language and using Chinese cultural concepts, examples and such to explain this and really turning it into something more of a Chinese philosophy style. And when it comes to Korea, this whole process repeated into Koreanization. All right, but the commentaries then are really important. That's really how people understand. You read the original words and you just say, I don't know what that means, but then you have to read some great master explaining to you what it means in your own language and your own culture. And there are English language commentaries on this sutra today that do this for Westerners in the same way. But it does change. Now, it does have some overarching themes, some things that are collectively throughout this sutra that are kind of the same, even though it's from 5 or 6 different actual scriptures. One is that the progression along the Buddhist path to full enlightenment or Buddhahood comes in stages, especially that 10 sages scripture at the beginning, and then at the end, some of the final chapters at the end are about a pilgrimage story, about a young boy named Sudana who goes on a mystical religious journey directed by the Bodhisattva of wisdom, tells him to go visit this area, this area, this area, and he meets figures like Amita Buddha, and he meets the Bodhisattva of compassion, Kwanseum Bosal, and other great figures. He meets them on a journey, a pilgrimage. So it very much gives a sense that this is the Buddhist path, that we, as we follow Buddhism, we have stages. You get to some level, and then you understand, and you're comfortable, and you can do that practice, but then there's a next level. More to learn, get to a higher level, and you understand, and you practice, and you get to know it, you get comfortable, but then there's a next level. They posit 10 levels along the Bodhisattva path. So the sense of level, Buddhism's not just one thing at one level, it's a series of steps that you climb up, big, steep steps, and a sense of pilgrimage. Now, pilgrimage is something very important in most every religion of the world, to travel from your home, to go away from your home and visit sacred places, visit holy places, and have some experience. Spiritual experience there. Here in Korea, we do this. We leave Seoul City and we visit great temples like Haeinsa. We visit holy mountains like Jirisan or Taebaeksan and such. And people go there and they pray and they meditate and they seek some experience for themselves, pilgrimage. And that's very much in this sutra, a feeling of that. And that really inspired the Chinese and the Koreans both to do this, taking long trips, journeys for Buddhist worship at different areas, different temples, getting different teachings. Today, we update this today with the temple stay program. You have temple stay, you can go stay 24 hours in a Buddhist temple and have a spiritual experience, a religious experience, and every temple is different. Everyone has a different history, different character, different artwork, and they give you a little bit different teachings there and a different style, and you're at a different mountain and different environment. And if you go to various different temple stay programs, it's a modern formation of this kind of pilgrimage that people used to do as an important part of Buddhist religious practice. One legacy of this idea is these beautiful paintings, some of the most beautiful paintings of Korean history. Could we maybe turn off this light up front? Maybe just the front light? Yeah, let people see this a little better. These are from the Goryeo dynasty. These paintings were made just about 1,000 years ago to 900 years ago, up to about 800 years ago, maybe. These are called Suul Kwansom paintings, water moon Water Moon Kwanseum Bosal. This is the Bodhisattva of compassion, Kwanseum Bosal. In every case, is sitting here on rocks, a rocky throne next to the water, the ocean. That's why it's called Suwul here. And this is the little boy, Sudana, who is traveling on a pilgrimage, meeting different bodhisattvas, different Buddhas, different Dharma realms on a pilgrimage. He visits like 28 different places, and finally at the end, he realizes full enlightenment. Okay, that's him, the little boy, Sudana. He's an innocent young boy as I do this and visiting these great figures like the Bodhisattva of compassion. Here is Sudana, visiting the Bodhisattva, and here is Sudana, visiting the standing Bodhisattva in this case. These are beautiful paintings, some of the most beautiful ever in Korea. Some of these are in North Korea, some of them are in Japan because of the Imjinweran invasion in Japan. A few of them, just 2 or 3 of them are here in Korea. Maybe there's about 10 of them in the world altogether. Okay, these are a legacy of this Hwaom Buddhist philosophy, this idea of Sudana and his pilgrimage to visit the Bodhisattva of compassion. That's in the Avatamsaka Sutra. That's part of it, and it led to these paintings and more. Now also, another theme, universal Buddhahood of all reality. Everything is enlightened, everything is part of Birobul. Birobul, also called Birojanabul, Vairocana Buddha, the universal Buddha, infinite cosmic light, the light that pervades like from the sun, the light that goes everywhere in every direction through the universe, the light of enlightenment, of Buddhahood that is everywhere, is personified by this Buddha figure. It's not like he's really a cosmic God, but he's just a symbol of the universal Buddhahood. And these are 3 great statues in Korea from various places that show the same thing. He's usually doing this hand mudra of a finger like this and wrapped in a fist like this. Heaven, earth, and humanity, human beings, surrounded by heaven, or unity of yin and yang, the opposites. And you can even see it as a sexual thing, the male and the female. But yin and yang unity, primal unity of all things. It's a teaching mudra, and it symbolizes ultimate oneness. And this Buddha figure, Birobul, is usually sewn with this kind of hand mudra. And he's the cosmic Buddha, essentially. He's the source of Buddhahood. All Buddhas are his avatars. You know what an avatar is? This is from Hinduism, the idea that gods, the various gods like Rama and Vishnu and Brahma, can appear on earth. They can appear on earth for a lifetime in some kind of human form, or even as an animal, some kind of animal form or a bird form or something, some divine form, a human being with blue skin. In the case of Krishna, he is an avatar of Vishnu who appeared on earth, and he had blue skin, so we knew that he was divine, etc. They appear on earth and they teach human beings and they help human beings, they help the world, and then they die and disappear, and another avatar comes. The idea that Buddhas who come to the earth are avatars of Birobul, really. The Sakyamuni Buddha, the one who was our teacher 2,500 years ago, real human being, that he was an avatar of Birobul, and all Buddhas, the next Buddha who will come, the Bodhisattvas, these are avatars really of him. It's all one divinity, the entire universe, and the enlightenment of the universe just manifests here in different ways that we can experience. Okay? He is the main deity of Hwaom Buddhism. This kind of Buddhism, this Avatamsaka sect, Hwaom Bulgyo, if you visit a real Hwaom temple, he should be the main Buddha in the center, in the main hall. The center of the altar is this Biro Buddha. In a Sun, which are the majority of Buddhist temples, a Sungyo, the meditation sect, Sun Bulgyo, it's Sakyamuni Buddha, as here in this hall, the guy who's doing this mudra. Here, Sakyamuni, the original human Buddha, but in a Hwaom Buddhist temple, he will be the main figure. Okay. Part 3, the interdependency of all phenomena, the dharmas. Everything is interdependent, depends on each other. Nothing is really independent. It is only our ego mind, that makes us think that we are independent from other people or from the world, that I can just exist by myself, for myself. No, we're all actually interrelated and interdependent, which is kind of a basic truth when you get down to thinking about it. You really try to be independent and you won't have any food to eat pretty quickly. You really need other people to provide food and water and civilization of all kinds for you. Interdependency of everything that exists, all the dharmas, that means every manifestation of matter and spirit and living beings, everything. All levels of reality and every being are related and interpenetrated. They connect together. And scientifically, we know this in terms of like how we exchange molecules, we exchange atoms. If I come anywhere close to you, if I give you a hug, we're exchanging atomic level molecules with each other, as well as viruses and bacteria, some healthy, some not. Whatever, we're exchanging things. We're all interconnected and related. We drink the water, we eat the food, and our waste is recycled through the universe. And finally, our body dies and it becomes dust and soil, and that becomes trees and plants, and then they die and it becomes smoke in the air, and it ends up as other human beings, part of their bodies. We all intercycle and interrelate. Okay, the image of Indra's net. This is Indra is kind of chief manager of the gods. In Korea, this became the Jaesokbul, who is frequently seen, especially in Chilsangdo paintings and sometimes in Shinjung Tenghwa paintings, Jaesokbul, Indra. And it has a net like a fisherman's net. Okay, and the net, in a net, it's very finely woven and everything is crossed together. And at every node of the net is a jewel, a diamond. And this diamond reflects like a mirror, all the other diamonds in the net. And that's us, that's all of us. Really, we are a diamond that's just an energy intersection, a focal point of energies, and we are reflecting everything around us. And everything around us reflects us. We're all interconnected in that way. This world is an entire net of diamonds, and that's Indra's net. It's a philosophy point in itself, and it is detailed in this Avatamsaka Sutra. The unity in totality allows every individual entity of the phenomenal world its uniqueness without attributing an inherent nature to anything. Buddhism says ultimately everything does not have its own self-nature. It is empty, emptiness. This is what we've been chanting, the Heart Sutra, etc. And every individual entity has its own uniqueness. Every diamond in that net is in fact a unique being, but it's not independent. It's reflecting every other being. It's unique, but it's totally interconnected also. And that's us, too. We are both unique and completely interconnected, interdependent. Now, a fifth point. Each part of the world mutually reflects the totality of the cosmos in that same way. This is another extension of the same idea. A quote, "In each dust mote of these worlds are countless worlds," and Buddha, a little dust mote, a little piece of dust contains countless worlds within it, and microscopically we know that's true, right? Using microscopes now, but they knew that and understood that anciently. From the tip of each hair of a Buddha's body are revealed the indescribable Pure Lands, vast, giant countries and nations in just the tip of a hair. This is kind of cosmic thinking between ultimate small to ultimate big. You know, our place in the solar system and the galaxy and the universe. That when you stretch your mind up that way, or stretch down to the virus bacteria level and down to the atomic level, it's the vastness of understanding those realms. The indescribable infinite lands all assemble in a hair. So this is their way of 2,000 years ago making this point that today we know very well, and we have people like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson on television telling us about the vast, how big is the universe and how small we are. But on the other hand, when you look at bacteria or atoms and molecules, how big we are, how many of them are within us. An entire universe of bacteria is simply within our gut that we don't even understand even what they are yet, and there's a million different kinds. Such we contain a universe within us, but at the same time we are just like one tiniest speck in the gigantic universe. And to keep that kind of cosmic perspective in mind instead of having too much individual ego. Point 6, and I promise this is the last one. Of this difficult stuff. Even truth, what we say is true and what we say is false. Even the truth is understood as encompassing and interpenetrating falsehood, reality and illusion. They encompass each other. They envelop each other and they interpenetrate each other. This is something very different from a kind of a Western style thinking of here is the truth and it is true and that is a lie and it is false. Indian thinking was much more subtle than that, much more inclusive, and the Chinese picked this up in their kind of yin-yang understanding, yang, Koreans say, yin-yang. The truth and what is a lie and what is real and what is illusion, they counterbalance with each other. They are necessary to each other and connected to each other. Okay, good is understood as encompassing and interpenetrating evil. And really the Chinese didn't even have any concept of evil the way that we did in Western civilization of the devil and Satan, kind of an ultimate evil, but let's just say good fortune and bad fortune. Good luck and bad luck, whatever. They counterbalance, they mix together, they interpenetrate with each other, just the same as truth and lies. All these concepts are relative and conditional. We can't stand on the absoluteness, not even of a truth of Buddha. We can't even say what the Buddha said is true and what that other religion says is false. We can't even say that. The truth and falsehood are mixed together and interconnected. You have to get them both. Similarly, all mind-made distinctions are understood as collapsing in the enlightened understanding of emptiness. Emptiness, like here in the Heart Sutra that we're talking about, when you really get that, when you really understand it deep in your mind, all these individual distinctions of true and false, and good and bad, and desirable and undesirable, and all the different, the rich and the poor and the high and the low, everything we make, all collapses together into a unity. Now, the Hua Om Jung, as a school of Buddhism, they kind of unified Buddhism. Many schools of Buddhism tried to do this, unifying, making a system, recognizing there's other schools of Buddhism, there's other kinds of Buddhism. They're just inferior. They're a beginning level, and ours is the most advanced level. The Chinese really enjoyed systematizing like this. The Indians really didn't. They just kept different schools of Buddhism, and each one thought they were the best, and that's it. The Chinese tended to put them together, make a system, and say, those other schools of Buddhism, those are beginning level, that's beginner's level, and that's good. It's a good understanding, it's proper, it's true, but then the next level is better. It's a higher understanding, and then and then us. Our school at the top is the best understanding. So they did this. The Tiantai Chuntai school was the first one to do that in China about 500 AD, and the Huaom did this about 100 years later, around 600. The Huaom was developing and made its own system with the Hinayana Theravada teachings. That's India, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, into Indonesia, Vietnam, South Vietnam, that kind of Buddhism. They're the first level, the beginning level. And actually that's closer stuff to what the Buddha actually taught in India, the real man, what he really said. It's more authentic. Okay, that's the beginning level, the beginner's level. That's where you can start your understanding. And then the early Mahayana teachings, such as Yogacara school, Madhyamaka school, and the Sunyata teachings and such, that's the second level. That's philosophy, difficult, complex philosophy, understandings of emptiness. Okay, that's the second level you can advance. And then the final teachings, which are thought to be the later teachings of Buddha when before his death, his final 10 years as a teacher, the later sutras, such as the Lotus Sutra, and the famous The Awakening of Faith, which is a very important scripture in the beginnings of Sunbulgyo. And Wonhyo, Master Wonhyo, who I talked about here before, studied that scripture very much and used that as kind of a bridge towards Sunbulgyo Zen Buddhism, the Awakening of Faith. That's the third level. The next highest way to understand. And then the sudden awakening teachings, the early beginnings of Chan or Sun or Zen, as we call it, Sunbulgyo, they put that at number 4. That's the fourth level, but still not the best. Still not the highest. They put that there, Sunbulgyo. And then number 5, the complete or perfect teachings of the Huayan. This Huaomzhong, the Avatamsaka Sutra, that's the highest level, that's the best. Okay, obviously, Sunbulgyo monks did not agree with this. They would switch the 4 and 5, and the Chuntai school, they were really angry about this at the third level, because Chuntai school put the Lotus Sutra is the highest understanding, and Avatamsaka is number 2. So this is the way they did. But this is a Chinese way of systematizing, of ranking, and this presages the Korean move towards unifying, towards making a unity of Buddhism. This is a way of attempting to bring it together, to unify, to make one system that it's understandable. Now, the Huaomzhong, this school of Buddhism, developing around 600 in China, becoming strong at this time, and then by the middle of the 600s, the middle time, a young monk named Wisang, wanting to go to China and study this under the second great master. The first great master of Huaom is around 600. The second great master around 650 or so. He's very strong and teaching in the Tang Dynasty. And Master Wisang, who's a middle-aged man by this, he's already 35, 40 years old. Wisang, he wants to go to China and study under him. He studied under the second great master of Huaom, then he came back to Korea and brought the teachings here and established this kind of Buddhism in Korea. So he is called Wisang Josa. Josa means a patriarch or the founder of a Buddhist school. Only a few monks have that title, to be a Josa, to be the founder of it, the one who started the school. It's the highest possible respect and reverence, really, you can say. Even Wonhyo is not a Josa. Wonhyo was brilliant, excellent thinker, but he didn't start anything. He started his own Buddhist school, but it died quickly after he died. He didn't stay together. He wasn't a disciplined guy. He wasn't organized. Wisang, his friend, his partner, was highly organized, a very different kind of guy. He's the kind of guy who could get 100 monks together and give them an education program step by step. Wonhyo was much more a free thinker and do whatever I want to do today kind of a guy. And so his Wonhyo's type of Buddhism did not, his writings were very influential and all, but his school of Buddhism did not continue. Huizang, it did continue all the way to today because he was very organized and he really set up a system that worked and endured. Okay, Josa. We also use this term, Zhou, the same Zhou, is in Taizhou. Taizhou, which means the founder of a dynasty, the first king of a dynasty. We say Wangong was Taizhou of Goryeo dynasty, the first king, the founder of the dynasty. And Taizhou Isengge, the grand founder of the Joseon dynasty. It's the same Zhou, Taizhou, and here Josa. Zhou, a master, founding master. Okay. Huizang. 2 portraits of him from classical times. This one kind of recopied, repainted. This is now in the Josadang, the founder shrine at Busoksa Temple. And this is an old one in Japan. The teachings of Huizang, of Hwaom Buddhism, went to Japan, got called Kegon Buddhism, and they highly respected Huizang as their own founder. As the founder of their kind of Kegon Buddhism also, and they have paintings and statues of Huizang in Japan at those temples. And this is the oldest, most precious antique. That's probably like 1,000 years old or something that's in a Japanese temple of Master Huizang. Okay, in China, these are the guys who started this kind of Buddhism. These are the 4 big names. Dushun is the founder. He started it, but he didn't develop a very fancy philosophy, but he started the concentrated study of the Avatamsaka Sutra. After it had been translated into Chinese, he said, we will focus on this sutra. Okay, but then next, Jian, he established the basic doctrines. He was the really great genius who really made Avatamsaka into Huayan Buddhism in China to start becoming a major school, one of the biggest Buddhist schools of the Tang Dynasty. And Huizang went there to be his student. So Huizang really studied like under the greatest Buddhist master in China at that time. Really the number 1 guy. And Fazang was a student of Jian. The number 1 student, the top student. And he became the next leader in China, and he was Huizang's friend and partner. They studied together, side by side, the Chinese boy and Huizang. Fazang was a little younger than Huizang, but they made good, close friends. They both got enlightenment together from Jian's teaching, and then they stayed in touch the rest of their life. They wrote letters to each other. They never visited again because of the great distance, but they wrote letters to each other, and they helped each other. They asked each other questions. Huizang would edit writings of Fazang, and et cetera, and they really helped each other to develop this. It was a great partnership intellectually between Korea and China. Okay, a good connection. He's a great one. And then after the student, or actually the grandson, there was another man in here, not so great, but then his student, Chengguan, further transformed the teachings, influenced by Huizang. He got Huizang's writings from Korea. Now he's in China, in the capital of China. He got Huizang's letters to Fazang and his writings, and they influenced him, and he made changes to the doctrine and developed it higher based on Huizang's thinking. So really, between Korea and China, this was a interconnected raising up, advancement of Buddhism. Huizang became the number 2 disciple of Jian after Fazang. Fazang was number 1 and the next patriarch after Jian died. They studied together for these 8 years at a temple at Jian's Mount Zhongnangshan. Zhongnangshan, the terminal South Mountains, it's kind of like saying Gyeongju Namsan, the same position. In the capital city, it's great mountains to the south. Great rocky, very high mountains, very remote. They are great. It is the place where Chinese Taoism or Dogyo started, Noja. Lao Tzu or Noja lived there in these mountains. And then later Chinese Buddhism also had great temples there. It's one of the really holy, greatest places of China, right south of Xi'an City today. Huizang studied there and such. And, what happened? Yes, right, here we are. And Huizang returned to unified Shilla in 670. That's just after the unification. Remember the wars, and General Kim Yu-shin led the Shilla armies to defeat Goguryeo and Baekje together with Tang China, and Korea ended up unified together. That was 668. 668. 2 years later after that, Huizang came back to a unified Shilla. When he left, it was just the Shilla kingdom there in Gyeongsang-do. Comes back 8 years later, and his government has the whole peninsula, all of Korea. Wonderful. He might have, some say, he came back to warn that the Chinese are going to attack, that there would be a new attack by Tang China. He wanted to warn Korea. This is kind of a patriotic or national legend. Not sure if it's true. He came with many gifts. When Huizang was leaving, the Emperor of China recognized him as a great enlightened master of Chinese Buddhism. The Emperor of China gave him sutras, Buddha statues, a whole bunch of gifts that took a big boat to carry all this stuff down the Han River, bringing this stuff back to Korea. So very precious, very valuable books and scriptures and statues and paintings, stuff that really helped advance Korean Buddhism. He was a great King Munmu. He was the unifier of the three kingdoms, the first king, the kind of the Taejo of Tongyil Shilla, the unified Shilla, and he was then a great, powerful king, one of the greatest ones. And Huizang came back home with these teachings and these statues and paintings and the highest honors. And King Munmu said, "Welcome, welcome, welcome. My monk, you are now you and Wonhyo together, Master Wonhyo, Huizang's good friend. The two of them were the top monks then of unified Shilla. And they're very different personalities, so they didn't get in each other's way, but they worked together to advance the situation. Now, this is Huizang's great accomplishment, his enlightenment figure. This is two different depictions of it. The Ilsung Bubge-do. Ilsung Bubge-do, the one vehicle, Ilsung Dharma realm chart, Bubge-do. Simply called the Bubge-do. Also called the Heiin-do. Heiin-do. Which is reflected in the temple Heiin-sa. That's why Heiin-sa is called Heiin-sa, the Heiin-do, which is another name for this chart. Huizang made this chart, created this, and it's in this design. It's in a maze-like design. You follow the characters this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, around here, like this. It's an endless loop, an endless diagram. 210 Chinese characters. Now, how could he make this? The story of this is really interesting. And I did tell this story about 2 years ago here, but I'll tell it again. When Huizang was finishing his studies and he thinks, okay, I understand the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Hua Om Gyung. I understand. His teacher said, well, you really understand? Okay, you write me an essay, write a summary of what you understand. What is this philosophy of Buddhism? Write it down. It's kind of like a final exam, kind of like a PhD dissertation in the university to show that you really understand. It's pretty much the same thing. And if you do it right, if the master accepts it, then you graduate. You have a PhD, you can become a professor yourself. It's the same deal in scholastic Buddhism. Okay, Jian here tells him, they show Huizang like he's a young little boy, but he was really like 43 years old at this point. Okay. Okay. Now Huizang, he tells him to do this. Now, first of all, Huizang sat in his room and he wrote 10 books. 10 volumes. It took him a week, hardly eating or sleeping, just meditating and writing continuously. 10 books to explain all the Hua Om philosophy. He brought this to Master Jian. Master Jian looked through it and he said, "No, you haven't got it. You don't understand. Too many words. Too many words." Usually these days in the university, when they reject your PhD thesis, they tell you to write more, do deeper research and write more. But Jian was the opposite. He said, too many words. You're talking around the subject. It's not the essential. So Wisang went back to his room again for 1 week. 1 week of just meditation and intensive work, focusing, and he wrote 1 book, 1 volume. Maybe 50 pages of the essence, the truth of this philosophy. And he gives it to Jian. And Jian says, read this thing, goes through and says, "Nah, you still don't have it. It's still not quite right. Too many words, too much theory. You haven't got the essence." So Wisang is very upset and he's ready to give up. He takes the book back from his master and then he throws it in the fire, to burn it. Say, okay, this is no good. I can't understand this. No good. And the book burns in the fire, but not all of it burns, not everything. There's some scraps of paper in the fire, some pieces of paper that don't burn. It burns all around, but then some small pieces left, not burning. And they both look at that and say, "Oh, that's strange." And Master Jian, he reaches in the fire with the fire stick, the poker, and he pulls out those pieces of paper, and there's a bunch of scraps of paper. They have 210 different Chinese characters on the paper. 210 characters. So he puts this together, and he gives it to Wisang, says, "Here, use these. Use these. Just 210 words." And Wisang goes back to his room and meditation, and he takes 1 week of intensive meditation and thought together, and he puts together these 210 characters into this diagram, making this. This is 210 characters, made in exact way, a poem, a long poem that winds around and back to the beginning and endlessly goes. He makes this diagram, the Il-sung Bubke Do, and he gives that to Master Jian. This diagram, Master Jian, he says, "You got it. You understand. You get a PhD. You are enlightened. You have got it, my man." And Wisang is very happy. And then Wisang prepares to go back to Korea. And he brings this diagram with him, and this diagram remains one of the most famous, one of the most essential parts of Korean Buddhism, this 210 character summary. This is one way, that Chinese and Korean Buddhism was very different from India. I told you the way of thinking is very different, kind of almost opposite, and the way of behavior in this sense. In India, they love to talk. They talk. If you meet a person from India, sometimes, especially a professor, an academic, they go blah, 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 blah. They will go for hours. They go on and on. They love to talk, lots of words. They explain everything, and then they give explanation of the explanation, and every point, they analyze it and break it down. And when a professor in India writes a book, of academic book, he'll make it 1,000 pages long, and that shows what a great professor he is. He fully explains every aspect. The Chinese are just opposite of that. Chinese like a few words. Look at the Nona of Kongjia. Just a few lines, a few sentences, one by one, just 1 or 2 sentences together, a collection of about 100 sayings. That's all Kongjia left. The Dodok Yung of Noja, the Lao Tzu, his Tao Te Ching, it's such a very short book, just a few hundred Chinese characters arranged in short poems, short chapters to explain all the philosophy. They like to condense. The less words, the better. This is how we get the Heart Sutra. That's the meaning of it. Now, the Heart Sutras from the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Wisdom Sutras, in India, they wrote 10,000 pages of philosophy. 10,000 pages of intense philosophy explaining emptiness of everything. That's the Prajnaparamita Sutras. It's a whole library in itself. You can spend the rest of your life reading it. This was brought to China, and the Chinese scholars said, what? We're not going to translate all of this, just the essential part, just the key part, the key section. Let's make a summary. And the Chinese turned the 10,000 pages of sutras, Chinese translated it into 1,000 pages to get the key points. And then other Chinese scholars put it down to 100 pages of just really the essential understanding. And then again, that 100 pages became this, that paper that we just chanted, the Heart Sutra. It's the heart of it, the essential point, the key point. This is what Koreans and Chinese do. They make less words and less words and less words until you get to the essential point. Now you can tell Professor Mason is from India. More of an Indian kind of guy. Talkative, whatever. If I was a Korean Buddhist master, I would stand here and say 10 words to explain Hua Om Buddhism, and that's it, and just leave you to think about it. But I'm talkative. To explain this, this is it, this diagram, 210 characters in the entire Avatamsaka Sutra, which I say is like 50 books, 40 chapters long, giant sutra. Wisang condensed it down into this one diagram to understand the whole thing. This is what's happening. His legacy, Master Widang's great teachings, it influenced China, Korea, not only just Korea, but China, Japan, Vietnam, Mongolia, Tibet, all got influenced by his teaching, by his Hua Om, by that diagram. That diagram appears now in Tibet. Tibetan Buddhist temples have that diagram up on some altar, and people bow in front of it as a holy image, a kind of mandala, such. Then, part of the legacy of this, 200 years later, after Master Wisang died, 200 years later, we get the Goryeo dynasty and Master Gunya. Now, I don't know, Gunya, I don't know if you have heard of him, but he's really very important in this history. He is the one, 923 to 973, right at the beginning of the Goryeo dynasty. He went to Master Wisang's disciples, founded great temples. His 10 great disciples founded 10 great temples because Wisang was very highly organized, and then they each one taught many disciples, next generation, a very organized system. That's why Hua Om Buddhism continued, and from Wisang to his disciple to Master Huiriyang, and then from Huiriyang at Gyasan Heinza, the Hein after the Heindo, one of our greatest temples, and then his student, Huiriyang's student, his student became the teacher of Gunya, a monk, and he sat in the capital city of Gaesong, in Gaesongshi, the capital city of the Goryeo dynasty, new dynasty. He published the Ilsung Bobgedo Wontonggi. Wontonggi means a commentary on. So the Wisang's great Dharma chart, he wrote a commentary, a sastra, in other words, a sastra, explaining what does this chart mean? What is the meaning of this? Again, he expanded it out to 100 pages to explain this one diagram. Well, it works that way sometimes. Okay, this was considered to be the most systematic study guide for the Bobgedo and all of Wisang's Hua Om philosophy, accepted as the established theory in the state examination for Goryeo monks, even before Gunya died. So Gunya published this commentary, and immediately everybody said, wow, this is correct, this is excellent, this explains that chart perfectly. This explains the mind of Master Wisang perfectly well, and therefore it became official. Even before he died, it was in the official state exam. You had to study his commentary to pass the exam. And it's been highly influential for 1,000 years. Still today at the Jogaejong universities like Dongguk right here, and the universities like at Tongdosa, where the monks study to become monks and to pass their monastic exams, they still study this document by Gyunya to really understand the Hwaom Bulgyo side of things. It's considered the key explanation for 1,000 years now. Nobody wrote a better one. Okay. Master Gyunya worked hard and he employed his commentary to reunify and reorganize the Hwaom Jung that had been intimidated by other schools. By his time, after 200 years, other schools, the Chunte Bulgyo and the Sun Bulgyo, had both become more dominant. The Zen Buddhism and the Tiantai Buddhism more dominating, and they had, kind of put down. But Gyunya used this to raise the status of Hwaom back up to the highest level, and to try to unify, because part of the problem with Hwaom Buddhism, they had already divided into two schools of understanding. The one school at Jirisan Hwaomsa in the south is called the South Mountain Sect. Down south, Hwaomsa, one of our greatest Hwaom Buddhist temples, and the other greatest temple, Gyasan Heinsa, was called the North Mountain Sect, and they were enemies already, saying, you don't understand Master Wisang correctly, we understand, and such. But Gyunya was able to reunify, to bring the North and the South back together and understand each other and bring it together again. Satisfy both of those. Finally, 200 years after Gyunya, 200 years later, Master Jinul Bojo Guksa, and this is his Budo top and his greatest temple, Songwangsa, and such, where he worked, he actually unified Korean Buddhism. He brought together Sun Bulgyo, the meditation sect, and the Hwaom Buddhism and the Chunte philosophy and the devotional Buddhist practices, brought them all together into one system that worked and harmonized together, and this became Jogaejong, Korean national Buddhism, which for 800 years has been the only really nationally unified Buddhism in all of the world. No other country has a united style of Buddhism in this way. He put that together, and why? Yes. He quoted Wisang's works, and then King Sukjong conferred upon him meaning Wisang. King Sukjong at this time, under Bojo's influence, gave him a posthumous title, raising him in rank 400 years after his death, making him one of the greatest of Koreans and such. And the unifier of Korean Buddhism, he used Wisang's works, and Gyunya's commentary made close use of those to unify Korean Buddhism. Now, the Hwaom philosophy remains very important in the unified Jogye Taego Korean Buddhism, with Wisang and Wonhyo's viewpoints considered to be their philosophical roots, along with Sun. Wisang, Wonhyo, and Sun Bulgyo together considered the roots, the basis of what is today Jogye Bulgyo. All right? It is a key part of modern monastic education. The Hwaom philosophy, the students study this in the official universities. They have to know it to become a monk, right along with the Sun Buddhist theories. The Hwaom Il-Sung Bobgedo is recited. It's chanted in main hall ceremonies, the same way we just chanted the Heart Sutra. Monks, they have it memorized, those 210 characters in that poem, they have it memorized, and they will chant that also in the ceremony. So still a key part of Korean Buddhism and understanding. 70 extant temples and hermitages, including 5 of Korea's greatest monasteries, claim that Master Wisang was their founder. That's a pretty strong legacy. That ties with Master Dosun, who is the subject of my talk last time, or last fall, last November. I talked here about Master Dosun. And he also is attributed with 70 temples, and that's the highest level, the two of them, from out of Korea's currently 8,000 temples and maybe about 1,200 traditional temples, really old temples, 70 of them attributed to Wisang, or that means his followers, his disciples started the temple in his name, in his memory. But we can only verify those in half of the cases. I have to add, as a professor, academically, the temples they say they were founded by Wisang, but if there's no evidence, then no evidence. Now, in particular, we talk about the Hwaom Shipchal. Hwaom Shipchal, Korea's 10 greatest Hwaom temples. Now, out of these are considered the greatest temples of this philosophy, this kind of teaching. They're devoted to teaching the Hwaom sect, established by Josa or his 10 foremost disciples. He had 10 greatest, highly enlightened disciples, and so 10 major temples, one for each disciple, and then each disciple could have 100 monks studying under him at each one of those 10 temples. So this is how Hwaom Buddhism became a big organization. Okay, this is the list. 5 of these still exist and are great temples. Busoksa, Hainsa, Hwaomsa, Bamasa, Bulguksa. These are some of the greatest temples of all of Korea and the greatest tourist attractions that we have. Grand monasteries, well worth visiting and such, and they are great temples of Korea. 5 of them, that's pretty good for one guy to have that kind of legacy right there. These are out of the top 10 temples in Korea, top 10. These are 5 out of the top 10. So, pretty good. Gyeongsan Gapsa, this is a second level. These temples exist. They still exist today. They are good temples, great temples. They are important temples, but not top level, not like these, the very greatest. These are in the top 100, the top 108. These are in the top 10. They're virtually the top 5 altogether, but these are in the top 108 members. Gapsa, Bongjongsa, Okchunsa. They're pretty good temples. And then these no longer exist. Right here, Samgaksan Cheongnangsa, that's here in Seoul, but doesn't exist anymore. And Palgongsan near Daegu, Mirisa, no more. They have been replaced by other great temples in these locations. We know in both cases, we know the location. We've located the stone foundations, but totally wiped out in history by wars. These are the locations of these 10, the same list. Okay, but locations, these are national parks, mostly national parks, county parks, provincial parks, all of them. So they're in great locations. They're in places that are really beautiful and great impressive mountains that Korea in the modern times decided to make national parks out of them. As far as their regional distribution, it's kind of interesting. North Gyeongsang is 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 out of the 10 in North Gyeongsang province, the real center, heart of Shilla culture. South Gyeongsang province, the other half of Shilla culture, Gyeongsangnam-do, 1, 2, 3. 3 of them there. So 7 out of the 10 are in Gyeongsang-do, the Yeongdong region. So that shows a certain bias towards the central core Shilla kingdom area. The other 3, interestingly outside, Jirisan Hwaomsa, the great holy mountain of Jirisan, but over on the Jeolledo side, Jeollanam-do, Guregun, over there, the former Baekje kingdom area, really the southwest. And then and here, Chungcheongdo, Gyeongsan, way over on the west coast in kind of an independent area, what is now Chungcheongnam-do near Daejeonshi and such, at the great Gyeryongsan, one of Korea's great holiest shamanistic power mountains. It is there. And then here up in Seoul, again, Baekje Kingdom area, the west coast of Korea, three of these temples, one far south near Jirisan, one central at Gongjushi near the old capital of Baekje, and one up north in kind of the north area of Baekje, which is Seoul area, Hanyang, Hansong city, right up here, near the Bukhansan mountain. It's in Unpyeonggu. If you go up to like Bulgwangsa area, Bulgwang, Jihacheolyok, towards Kupabal, on that side of the Bukhansan mountains, the northwest side, that's where that temple used to be, a really great temple, totally lost. They only found it 10 years ago when they were excavating for an apartment complex, going to build some apartments right next to the mountain. They found these stone foundations and, oh my God, that's that's where the temple was. They didn't even know before that. But that's been kind of replaced by, say, Dosunza and Sungasa, the other great temples of the Samgaksan area. All right, now, to bring this in, Bulguksa and Sokaram, which I did talk about here a couple of years ago, and such as Hwaom Temple. It's not really known that way, but it's the best way to understand the architecture, the arrangement, the very complex arrangement of the figures and stylings of these temples, is to understand that they are originally built under the Hwaom philosophy. It's not just random or just some original idea, but built according to the Hwaom philosophy. Notice here the bridges and the monumental architecture at the front of Bulguksa. From the air to see the different compounds, it's kind of built like a mandala, built like an uneven but kind of twisting mandala between the great halls and a progression through them. The Bodhisattva of compassion is way up here in the back, just like in the sutra. It's the last place that Sudana visits, is the Bodhisattva of compassion for enlightenment, way back up there. It's kind of in the progression of a pilgrimage. And here is the two pagodas symbolizing the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. This is what it looked like in 1910s, and we're very lucky to have such a repaired and refurbished temple. It was this much ruined 100 years ago, had been forgotten. Such. It has a strong sense in this temple of pilgrimage, of coming in, passing over bridges, going over beautiful ponds, entering a kind of Buddhist paradise, stages, step by step, just like in the Avatamsaka Sutra. And getting to the front, these massive bridges, again, the sense of crossing over, passing over, going up a step, a level, and then going up another level and passing through the gate to get to the Buddha world. This comes from this Hwaom Gyung Sutra idea. Again, from above, the arrangement of it all. The stairway, the main stairway, bridges, pilgrimage. The two great pagodas in the courtyard, arranged side by side, Sakyamuni Buddha and the Tabotap, the Buddha of many treasures. This is from the concept of the Lotus Sutra, an integrated part of this type of Buddhist philosophy. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The Sukhatap representing Sakyamuni, and the Tabotap, a very original design, very complex, relating to Hwaom philosophy in its different levels. Magnificent piece of architecture, one of the best things in Korea. And this is what's on your 10-won coin. Most of us are carrying around one of these Tabotap pagodas in our pocket. It's right here on the money. It's the only Buddhist symbol on Korean money. Everything else on Korean money is Confucian. It's Seongnihak, it's Neo-Confucianism from the early Joseon dynasty. Every single thing on the money except this, the Tabotap, representing Korea's golden age and its whole Buddhist heritage in that sense. This is in the back of the temple, in the far back corner is the Birojeon. the Hall of Biro Buddha, one of the great halls of Bulguksa Temple, although for tourists not so well known. Everybody focuses up front on the two pagodas. This is in the back. This contains this national treasure number 26, a really great statue, again, of Biro Buddha, the leading Buddha of Hwaom Buddhism, enshrined here. This is one of Korea's greatest treasures as far as bronze statue. Another photo of the same statue. Again, from above, this Biro Jun, it's right back here. Back here. Back behind this building, back here, hidden by these trees. There was another building here, but we don't know what that was. But the Gwanumjung back here makes a whole complex of traveling through to the different Buddha realms. The Sokaram Buddha, in the same way, organized and arranged according to Hwaom Buddhist philosophy. The different figures, the entranceway, the sense of levels, of stages of going inside, the complex arrangement with the many different deities around. This is the way it looked in 100 years ago. This much bad condition. This was totally lost on the mountain. Lost. Korean people had forgotten it. Only a few villagers around that area, some village ajashis, harabajis, who went up on the mountain like hunting for animals or to get sannamul, vegetables or something. They knew that there was some kind of stone Buddha up there. Otherwise lost and forgotten. A Japanese mailman, Japanese post office worker found this. You got to give the Japanese credit for something. In 1912, when the Japanese started a post office system, he visited the village at Tohamsan Mountain here, and he's just talking to people. He could speak Korean. He's talking to some old grandfather, and the grandfather, there's some stone Buddha up there, hidden in the trees, covered by bushes. Nobody knows. And he went up there on Sunday, his off day, Sunday, he would travel up on the mountain searching, looking. Finally, after several months, he found the Sokaram, and he reported to the Japanese government. He said, the Japanese authorities came up there to take a look, and they said, oh my God, that's something all right. It's like the greatest artwork of Northeast Asia there, just totally forgotten and hidden. And so you see this figure, this guardian figure here, that's this. It's been beautifully restored. It looked like this, but it was actually in very good condition. Really good condition. They just had to clean it up and repair the stones that had fallen down, and it becomes looking like this. It was not that hard, and it is today really beautiful, really magnificent. One of the greatest works of art. The nature, I explained this in a previous lecture. I went into detail for half an hour about how the architecture of this, it is various different Buddhas. He's in the mudra of Sakyamuni Buddha, but other factors of his positioning make him seem like Birobul or Amitabul. And so you get kind of ambiguous question, is this Sakyamuni Buddha or is it Amita Buddha or Vairocana Biro Buddha? Different professors, different scholars make different arguments. Oh, it must be this kind of Buddha because of this position and this factor and the other deities around it. But I say, is it all three? Was it intended to be all three? In the Hwaom Buddhist ultimate philosophy that all Buddhas are Birobul. Ultimately, they come from Birobul. They manifest as avatars. All Buddhas are really one Buddha. That's Hwaom Bulgyo thinking, philosophy. Maybe it's really all Buddhas. It's the ultimate Buddha, not just one. This is Sokaram from the outside, from the air. An amazing complex. That Buddha is there in the cave. Also at nearby at Namsan, the Bodhyam Buddha, again with Hwaom Buddhist motifs, and five Buddhas in his halo around him, this amazing lotus flower halo with 5 different Buddha figures around him. He seems to be Sakyamuni Buddha, but again, ambiguous elements of this that indicate Lotus Sutra and Amita Buddha and possibly Hua Om teachings involved also, with this fantastic dragon head. Look at that. The head of a dragon, the face of a dragon right behind him, coming out of the mountain, giving dragon energy right behind him. This is indications that this is a Hua Om Buddhist figure, and again, kind of a unified Buddha figure. This is, again, a Buddha that represents all kinds of Buddhas manifesting. It manifests into our world as Sakyamuni Buddha particularly, but in the halo, 5 other Buddhas can be seen in a kind of cosmic artwork arrangement. Remember the 5 levels of Buddhism that Hua Om arranged the schools of Buddhism into 5 levels. Here we have the 5 different Buddhas representing those levels in this halo, and the top Buddha on top. Okay, these are different halos showing different styles from all around Korea, and some of these have 7 Buddhas, and some have no Buddhas, but only flowers. But this particular one, this one at the top, with his hands bunched together there in the center, is this possibly Biro? Is that Birojana Buddha manifesting the other 4 Buddhas and the Sakyamuni Buddha in the front, manifesting that this is the whole Hua Om Buddhist cosmos represented in one figure? Maybe. The other, the transformation Buddhas on the sides. They're a little worn out, it's kind of hard to tell. But this up here, the ultimate Birobul, making the others as his avatar, including this Sakyamuni, the Buddha of our world, the one who came to us. Now, to understand all this more deeply, more than I can ever explain to you in English, here's your best book. And it's pretty recent. It's from 2007. Richard D. McBride, I got to meet him. He's a good professor of Korea. He's an American guy, but he really studied Korean Buddhism deeply, especially the Hwa Om Bulgyo. That's his specialty. He's now at UCLA, together with the great Robert Buswell, who is the world's top expert on Sun Bulgyo in English. I mean, among foreigners who are not Koreans, he's the top expert, and the 2 of them are both at UCLA. So they've built really a great Korean Buddhism program. Richard McBride is pretty young. He's only about 40 years old, but this is his great initial book, Domesticating the Dharma. If you read this book, it's really about how Hwa Om Buddhism developed in Korea in the early days and made a synthesis, a union of Buddhism for Shilla Kingdom. And it's really a good book, and it's very easy to understand. It's very readable book. So I really recommend this if you want to do this in English. This is the way to go. Okay? And my own website for further information about Haeinsa, Hwaomsa, all the other really great temples of Korea, the great Hwaom temples, the Hwaom Chipchal. As I mentioned, the 8 temples that exist, I have pages about all those temples with photos and their artwork and their history on my website to get into this deeper. Okay? So that is Hwaom Buddhism and its legacy here in Korea. Thank you for listening. And I'll take any questions. Which one? Avatar. Yeah, first part. Oh, the Avatamsaka, and Koreans say Avatar. Yeah, Avatar is the word. Okay. It's the same as the Chinese translated that into Huayan, and then in Korean, the same Chinese characters that's pronounced Hwa Om. So it's the same thing, yeah. But I guess Korean, like Dongguk University scholars might say Avatar for.
So the representation of something, then we say the word avatar.
Oh, avatar. For Avatar, like that movie. Yeah, it can be that way. Sure. Questions?
Is there an English translation of the diagram that was drawn by?
Yes. In fact, the best way, Master Gunya's commentary, the Bubgedo Wontongi, that has just been published. I was an English editor, proofreader of it. I did the work correcting the English on it. That was just published like last year. And you could, I'm forgetting the exact title in English, but it's a work in English about this, the Ilsung Bubgedo, the Dharma Realm chart. And it's about that thick. And it's available in the Buddhist bookstores, like nearby Chogyesa. Maybe right here at Dongguk, because Dongguk professors did it. So maybe at the Dongguk Buddhist bookstore, it might be right here. But definitely down by Chogyesa, like across from Chogyesa Temple at the Buddhist bookstore in the Temple State Center. They definitely have it. I saw it there. I'm forgetting the name of it, even though I worked on it. I forget the title. But that book, and see, that contains a very exact English translation of the actual chart, and then a whole English translation of the commentary on the chart, so you can understand what the chart is talking about, those little 210 characters. So yes, is available.
The 6 or 7 characters you described in the first part of your presentation is the contents of 210.
Well, no, that's from the Avatamsaka Sutra itself. The key concepts that run through that sutra as it was written on the Silk Road, North India and the Silk Road and such, the key concepts of that sutra itself, which that whole sutra has been translated to English. And so, yeah, that's the key themes of that. Wisang's diagram contains those themes, but again, it's just 210 words in a poem arrangement. So I think just reading those 210 words, you wouldn't understand what's being said. This is the problem with this kind of summary, but where you really have to understand the philosophy, and then you look at the diagram and you say, oh yes, that explains it perfectly, after you already understand.
Until we understand, then we can dice interpret the meaning of 110 letters.
Yes. Then you can look at that diagram and you'll recognize it and you'll say, oh yeah, that's enlightened wisdom, after you understand the teaching. So you have to understand those principles, and it's a matter of practicing to get that deeply, of course, always. Like when I said those principles, all is one, one is all, the whole world is one flower, as Master Sun San used to teach overseas. You can say those things, I say them to you, maybe you understand what I mean, but that doesn't get you enlightened. Enlightenment is not just an intellectual understanding. You have to practice it. You have to meditate on and fix your mind to a very tranquil meditative state, and then have that idea and then get that actual feeling, that actual perception where you really see and feel and understand that everything is one through very deep meditation. Then you progress towards enlightenment. The intellectual understanding is just one step. It's just a first step. We have to it takes years of practice, of course, and that's what the Sunbulgyo side is, the focused meditation, to really understand that philosophy. And then once you understand it, you don't need the words anymore, right? It's kind of a human nature, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of what we do. The Indians tend to just explain things more and more and more, and they write books about the books and just keep adding more words. The Chinese have this tendency to summarize into one diagram or picture or just a few lines of poetry, whatever. But then you need to to explain it, and the whole process kind of begins again. So we just did a 200-page book about Master Gunya's commentary, which is about 30, 40 pages, which is about Wisang's diagram of 210 characters. We're explaining it in what Gunya is saying. We explain it in English in more words. Maybe somebody will condense my book down to 3 pages that give the essence. Yeah. It's a process. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy doing that same thing. I like playing this game. Like with Korean history, when I teach the whole course on Korean history, I have a 1-page diagram that contains all Korean history. All the key points, the dynasties, the realms, the capital city, the designations of good time, bad time, and the key points of cultural development, just on 1 page. So I can give that to university students and just say, you can get the whole thing right there. But then it all needs to be explained. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for enjoying. 성불합시다.